Minister, distinguished guests. Thank you for the opportunity. And good morning, everybody. All protocols observed. Can you hear me? Excellent. My name is Fredros. I work at Ifakara Health Institute and at the University of Glasgow. Ifakara is in Tanzania. The University of Glasgow is in Scotland. If you control L, this thing will pop up. Thank you. I wanted to begin by asking here, and first of all, I have to say, it's my first time ever to speak in front of a minister. In my career as a scientist, this is the highest altitude occasion I've been to. And I beg that you forgive us if there's a misstep at some point. I wanted to begin by asking the people in the audience if there's anybody who has had malaria in the last 3 years. Please raise your hands. What about in the last 1 year? 2 people. In the last 2 years? Okay, so none of the people in this room has had malaria in the last 2 years. And I wanted to ask this question just to express how irrelevant we are here. And I need you to think about it for a moment. Think about it for a moment. When HIV people go to Geneva to campaign or to Washington, usually they bring along people who are living with the infection and are very passionate about this. In the malaria control program, we leave the community behind and we come to these meetings and talk on their behalf. And usually we are not their representatives. We are city dwellers, middle class mostly, fairly wealthy by African standards. And we write these nice reports and make policy on behalf of the people who actually suffer in these diseases. Mama said malaria is a problem of the environment. I wanted to add that it says it is a parasite problem, but also a mosquito problem and a problem of the environment, yes. It accelerates poverty, and poverty accelerates malaria at the same time. If you look at that picture there, and then I tell you that our best methods for controlling malaria are bed nets, and you can ask, what is bed nets going to do to that guy who lives there? And I will come back to that a little later. This is a graph from The Economist from last year. I want to illustrate this to use this to illustrate the problem of malaria as we have it today. So if you lived in a country in the year 2000, and your country had a population of 1 million people, and the malaria prevalence there was 20%, if in 20 years down the line you've reduced malaria prevalence by 50, so you're back to 10% now, but your population has gone up double as well, you realize very quickly that your malaria prevalence is still exactly the same. What has changed, however, is that now the cost of the commodities that you're buying in 2000 have gone up. So whereas the WHO and the Ministry of Health will come and say malaria has gone down, you realize very quickly that from a public health and economic perspective, the burden has actually gone up. And that is the reason that we need innovative tools. We need not just innovative tools, but actually very transformative tools. We do not need tools that reduce malaria by 20% or by 10% or by 50%. We need something that's going to crush this by 90%. Because if we don't do that, we cannot catch up. Africa's population is growing. The cost of goods going up, inflation. So if my budget was $1 million in the year 2000, today it's $10 million, even if malaria prevalence has gone down. Without transformational tools, we're not going to make it. But I realize that in here, not everybody is a malaria scientist like me, so I want to explain a little bit what happens. A mosquito, usually an Anopheles, comes to you and it bites a person. If this person has malaria, it picks the parasite, and 12 days later it bites another person, and that person can get malaria. This is how transmission happens. Usually it's a very specific species of a group of mosquitoes. We call them Anopheles, and it's only the females. This is nothing against women. Female mosquitoes need blood so they can lay eggs. In the process of looking for blood, they might transmit malaria. They're trying to survive. It's not their fault. Today, our best interventions include drugs, insecticides, nets. We spray houses. We give people bed nets. We have treatment, and so on and so forth. Many of these things have been very, very effective, but not 90% effective, not 100% effective. And today we even have a malaria vaccine. We have 2 of them. The first one was approved in the year 2021. It was called the RTSS, and I am aware that Ghana is already implementing malaria vaccine trials. And for people who do not know, in public health, Ghana has always been number 1 in Africa, across the board. There was a second malaria vaccine that was approved in 2023, I believe. It's called the R21. This new vaccine is much more available, but neither of the vaccines are as good as other vaccines are. So typically vaccines are supposed to give you 90% protection for the rest of your life. Malaria vaccines will give you 40% or so, and it works just for about 2 years, and then you need another dose, and another dose, and another dose. So typically we have a 4-dose vaccine now. That just tells you how weak our arsenal for malaria control are. So we need new tools, and actually there are many, many such new tools being developed. One of them is gene drives. There are people in this room who know about gene drives much more than me. Austin Butt created the name gene drives, and he's sitting right behind there. Many of you have never heard Austin speak, but when you hear people say gene drives, Austin there created this term. Congratulations. When mosquitoes mate, 50% of them will have one characteristic, the other 50 won't. When you have a gene drive system in them, nearly all of them will have that characteristic that you want. And as a result of this, we can now make mosquitoes that are either only all male, or we can make mosquitoes that cannot transmit malaria. We call this a suppression drive vis-a-vis replacement drive. We can transform mosquitoes so that either they do not exist, so the populations continuously decline and they disappear, or we can transform these mosquitoes so that they are no longer capable of transmitting disease. Both of these have been proven in the lab. There is no question about that. In fact, lab studies have demonstrated that some of these studies, the mosquitoes will disappear in just about 10 generations. And if you convert them to not be able to transmit disease, my colleague Dixon is here with people from Imperial. They work on this. And they have shown, and the studies have shown, that these constructs can completely eliminate malaria transmission from that. So we are not here to ask whether gene drives work. We are here to ask the question, how do we move forward with a technology of such potential? Should we ignore it because the subject is controversial? Or should we say it is worth trying because of the burden of malaria that we have in Africa? I am not here to make the decision, I'm just a messenger, so the decision is all yours. And therefore the rest of my talk will be on the key considerations and pathways of how we can integrate gene drives into a malaria control strategy. And typically, these malaria control strategies already have bed nets, house spray, treatments, vaccines, like I said earlier. Someone says, we also have gene drives. The question is, how do we integrate this into that system? How do we use it in such a way that the sum is greater than the whole? Is that correct English? That there is complementarity and synergism. So one way to look at this is to look at, in public health generally, we have a health system framework that works very well for things such as medicine. It's basically the realization that for any tool, for any product, for any vaccine, it's not just the product itself that you need. You need a system, a complete system around it. You need the governance, you need the information about it. You need the evidence, you need a delivery mechanism, you need the people. And so when we talk of genetically modified mosquitoes, or GeneRevs to be specific, how does this work? And we've seen this before with ACTs, which are our best malaria medicine today. They have cure rates of up to 98% in the lab, but in the village, it's just about 40%. Reason is, someone is sick, they don't go to the hospital the same day, or if they go, they don't get a right diagnosis. And even if they get the right diagnosis, they may not get the medicine. And even if they get the medicine, they may not take the full dose. So in the end of the day, something that was supposed to be 100% efficacious is now only 40%. We don't want this to happen with GeneRevs. We have to look at that entire ecosystem. So my talk is really about the rest of this. And the best way to do this is, number one, we have to listen. In Tanzania, I work with a colleague of mine called Lina. She runs a program called African Conversations, where essentially we just listen to people. We also have to build bridges, create partnerships, and then we have to educate the people. Often, people don't know much about the technology. But what we also learn is they also don't know much about the burden of the disease in their own country. We went to the universities in Dar es Salaam and we asked people, how much malaria is in Tanzania? And these professors, they just don't know. It's the same crowd as we have here. People who claim to represent malaria endemic countries but know nothing about malaria. They have not had an infection since the past 10 years. But because they want to be the one in the airplane or if you say we have a malaria meeting in DC, they're the ones who want to come. We have to be careful of that. So the first question is, how and where do we use GeneRevs? Most countries have high transmission settings and low transmission settings. Here is Kenya. There are many people from Kenya here. And I may ask you a simple question. If you had GeneRevs, where do you put it? Put it in Western Kenya, you put it in the middle, or you put it where? The choice is yours. But you need to make this carefully. This is Uganda. There are many Uganda people here. I think in Uganda I would say Ugandan people, but you can also say Ugandan people. Where would you put GeneRevs? And in Ghana, this is what we have. Ghana offers an interesting scenario in the sense that in the north you have unstable malaria, and in the south you have stable malaria. Where do you put your GeneRevs? We have spoken to experts a lot, and they tell us that actually GeneRevs have use in all these scenarios. It just depends on what you want to do with it. You can use it in high transmission settings to reduce the burden. You can also use it in low transmission settings to sustain the gain. A few years ago, we spoke to the people who run the malaria control program in Zanzibar. For 10 years plus, Zanzibar has had 1%, nearly 0% malaria. And the program director was saying that, Fredros, every time one person is sick in this entire village, I have to send a team of 20 people. They have to prick everybody. They have to spray every house. They have to figure out whether this case is imported or it's originated from here. It costs so much money. And most people in Zanzibar don't remember the last time they had malaria. And if they have one case, they have to initiate this entire machinery that is so expensive for them. And to say, I just wish we had something that works in the background. They say the tail of malaria control is so long and so big. We've got to clip it. And the only way to clip this is either you have a very good vaccine that lasts forever, or you have a technology like GeneRevs or you get oil money and build a city. Many years ago, I studied in Switzerland, and I noticed the first week I arrived that the entire city was concrete. I didn't see soil my first week. People, some of you understand what I mean. I didn't touch soil with my boots. I said, where did these guys get the money to tarmac the whole city? And then I went to the river on the Rhine, and on the side of the river there's concrete along the whole. There's no vegetation. There can never be malaria there. They had the money to do it. We don't have this. But we need the same kind of health care. So what do? We need a technology that is low cost, sustainable, effective, and still transformational, even before we become rich. And we think, based on the evidence that we have from the labs, that gene drives might be an answer. Might be. Not necessarily will be. It's worth testing. I will try and move quickly. Africa also has a lot of conflicts, unrests. We don't like to talk about this, but we spend a lot more money on guns than we spend on medicines. Sometimes we have pandemics as well. And in cases like this, you can't send people to deliver bed nets. But maybe you can send a mosquito. Maybe. There are many use cases of gene drives. So to conclude that section, the thing that experts have told us, that we have learned from talking to many experts, is that we have to design our gene drive products to fit with or into the existing strategies. It's not something that we think about after. We have to, in the design stage, you have to design these technologies such that they can fit into the existing strategies, rather than waiting and then saying, how do I change my strategies to accommodate gene drives? We have to design a technology that fits into that. So this is a message to the developers of the technology. What we have also learned is that it's okay, because people used to ask, hey, so if I release mosquitoes here and I also spray the house, how is that going to work? Are the mosquitoes going to really survive? Is gene drive going to spread? Should we stop distributing insecticide-treated nets? Should we stop spraying houses because we release gene drives? So you don't go to the village and tell people, don't use your nets because we've released the mosquitoes. Unfortunately, evidence suggests that because of the low threshold nature, the high efficiency, the gene drives will just work. So far, this is the consensus. We need to check whether it's true, but it's very likely the case. The next question that has come several times is, Africa has many mosquito species. Globally, we have nearly 3,500 species of malaria, or mosquitoes. About 400 of them are anopheles. About 70 of them are capable, to a certain extent, of transmitting malaria. In Africa, the main guys are 4. Anopheles gambiae, Anopheles arabiensis, Anopheles funestus, Anopheles colutzii. We do have in Eastern Africa Anopheles stephensii, which is a recent entry. People often ask, how do you deal with this situation? That's important. We can discuss that many times, but we have to realize that if you wanted to use the technology, you must go into the area and understand which of these mosquitoes is your most important one. So, as an example, in the East and Southern Africa region, the most important vector is Anopheles funestus. So if you had a gene drive product that works only on Anopheles gambiae, it may not be the most appropriate. And this is how it plays out in Tanzania. In the north of Tanzania, you have gambiae funestus. In the south, you have funestus mostly and a little bit of gambiae. The rest of the country, you have Anopheles arabiensis. Gene drives for one of those species will not work on all of them, so you have to be very careful, but you need this information. And the reason I raise this is to emphasize the fact that gene drives will not be our primary intervention unless we had multiple constructs that target the different species. In the absence of that, we must continue to use our other interventions. So these studies of understanding the vector species, their distribution, how they intermingle, what structures exist, are studies that must be done in the beginning before we move forward. I want to talk a little bit about the threat of Anopheles stephensii, which comes up, and I know Ghana as well has reported the presence of Anopheles stephensii a few years ago. This is an Asian Anopheles mosquito. It loves to live in cities. And you know, the problem of malaria in cities is people who dwell in cities are very noisy. So if there was a newspaper article today that there's malaria in Nairobi, even if it's one case, so Nairobi probably has 10-15% of all Kenyans living there. If you had a single case of malaria in Nairobi, they will make a lot of noise and start demanding bed nets. Now, if the Minister of Health says, let's send bed nets to Nairobi, how much bed nets do you have left for the village? 0. And that is a hidden problem with stephensii because it affects the noisemakers. So we need a low-cost technology that can deal with it. And we think here that the work that Oxitec and the team are doing in Djibouti, even though their strategy is not specifically gene drives but is related, will give us a lot of opportunity here and indications of how we can use this technology to deal with this invasive species. Similarly, the work that has been done by our colleagues from the World Mosquito Program on Wolbachia, mostly outside Africa, and increasingly now, apparently now they're getting into Africa as well. These lessons will be important for us going forward. You also have to realize that there are technologies that give you the benefit today. If you release gene drives, and I said earlier, you don't tell people to stop using their bed nets now because gene drives, if you release 10 of them today, it will take time before these populations, you know, balloon and this thing starts taking effect. That delay needs protection during that period as well. And gene drives have this system where they can give you long-term gain, but the impact is delayed. And so at the beginning, you have to keep having your intervention. And this is a conceptual framework of how it might work. You know, you release your mosquitoes, it rises to the top, and there will be fluctuations in the population, yes. The bed nets, typically, you distribute them every 3 years, the efficacy goes down and up and down, and so you can play with that and make sure that your gene drives are in the mix. Once gene drives are established, we should be good to go. You might also ask the question, if I want my gene drives to drive fastest, should I go there at a time when mosquito populations are lowest, or should I release them when mosquito populations are rising? Do we still have a few minutes? Few minutes, excellent. Or should I release them when mosquito populations are rising? And there are indications at the moment that the best time is when the populations are rising so that your gene drive can establish itself. We are not worried a lot about surveillance, even though we have to think about it, but we do believe that the systems that countries already have in place can basically be expanded to incorporate gene drives as well. So, of course, you have to make sure that your molecular systems are working as well so you can detect the drives, but all in all, we think that the existing surveillance structures can very easily be adapted to accommodate gene drives. One concern people have had is, what about my neighbors? So people typically say, oh, country X has regulations, regulatory approval for gene drives. What about country Y next door? So do you tell your neighbors that we have released mosquitoes? Fence your country or something? And Honorable Minister is here. I think this is where the African Union, the scientists are looking up to you and your colleagues, compatriots across Africa, to have some kind of regional arrangements, understanding, agreements that would allow regulatory approval across borders. Unfortunately, we cannot stop mosquitoes from flying across, but we must inform our neighbors when we are going to do this. So this is something scientists cannot do, but we put it in the hands of the honorable ministers. Last thing, two last points. One is people have asked about insecticide resistance. Do you release mosquitoes that are resistant or not? Anopheles mosquitoes across Africa are all insecticide resistant. So when you come with your gene drives, do you make sure your gene drives are also resistant, or do you just let them die on the net? I don't know. It's a question we have to ask, right? And is it ethical to release resistant mosquitoes? And if you release resistant mosquitoes, what if something goes wrong? Can you go out and spray and kill them? So there are many questions that we still have to answer here. Okay? Lastly, is about the money, the funding. So today, in most countries, malaria control is financed by global funds. I was about to say PMI, until, and now I know PMI, let me not say much. But global fund itself is about 40% US funded. So if you think about the countries that are going to suffer, there are countries in Africa where the US health budget is 3 times the money that the country itself puts in. So what happens if Mr. Trump says, I'm America only? And the reason we bring this here is, as I said earlier, the commodities are rising, but gene drives give us the opportunity to have cost savings. If they worked, it is the first technology for which we will not question, should we take money from bed nets and put on gene drives? Or take, when vaccines came, people said, oh, and I remember these discussions because vaccine people and bed net people had their own fight. Do you want to take money from bed nets to go buy vaccines? Bed net people don't want to listen to that. Gene drives will probably, if they work, offer us an opportunity to reduce costs. And I think that's a good thing worth exploring. And as my friend Claudia, who I believe is in the audience, I haven't seen her, has said to me a few years ago that gene drives are the ultimate equity tool. They will level the playing field. And I think that's an important thing, if we can achieve that, if we can remove the barriers from everybody for that. I want to finish by recognizing our partners in the North who have been very supportive of the African endeavors to do gene drives. Today we have Target Malaria, we have Transmission Zero, and we have UCMI working in Sao Tome and Principe. These groups, the 3 groups working on gene drives, have been super supportive, doing co-development with the African partners, with the understanding that the African must lead. The African must take the lead. So here is someone who, Austin Butt discovered this technology many years ago with his colleagues, one of the pioneers of this. But you never hear his name because he's been very supportive of the African partners. And we want to recognize that, but also to encourage you to continue being that supportive. And at the same time, our partners like Dixon is here. And Dixon, I want to use you as an example here. When we try to build technical capacity in Africa to do this, we sometimes can rely on, I'll skip that and just show this. We can rely on I come from Tanzania, and President Julius Nyerere once told people that when you have very little, you must use the little to send your child away. And when your child is sent away, they must use that to develop themselves and can come back. When you have very little food, don't eat it. Give it to one person. Let the one person go out. And here we have Tib. Tib is sitting on the other side. Tibebu Habtowold. He's an Ethiopian scientist who worked for many years at Imperial College, recently moved to Tanzania, worked with my Tanzanian colleague there, and they created the first ever genetically modified mosquito in Africa. I think if there were models to use to leverage these northern partnerships, this is really the kind of thing that we want to do. Ladies and gentlemen, before I close, I want to recognize that the information that we have shared today came from a range of experts. We spoke to modelers, gene drive experts, NMCPs. I have spoken to vector biologists, to gender experts. I've spoken to a lot of you here. You might have had a Zoom call with me. And we appreciate all that. And I think that sharing of knowledge is important for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.